Hello there, welcome to an episode of CLOG Extra. Today we're going to be talking about the CLOG project facility. That's right. Now, the project facility of CLOG is not just for CLOG. It can actually be used for any Common Lisp program. Just like the ID in general that is contained in the builder could be used for any single application that you'd like to develop in Common Lisp, even in fact if it's not involved with CLOG. Now, let's take a look at the interface itself and talk about it. So basically, this is your current project. These projects, the project list that you see here, those are all contained in one of the ASDF available directories. Now, on your system in general, by default, the directory in the home location, right, that location, which we're going to call, which is Common Lisp, that pretty much is built in. And I don't think there's even a way you could turn it off if you want to. So if you have a directory called Common Lisp in your home directory, right, then that is going to be where, in fact, you can basically put freely any project in Common Lisp. Anything in there, of course, will be available, and it's going to show up on this list. So that's, of course, one place. But most of us have installed QuickLisp. When you install QuickLisp, it also actually installs the directory as well. And basically, if we go to our QuickLisp directory, sorry, my mouth's not working great today. Basically, if you take a look, almost everyone has something called the local projects. So if you cd into local projects, I probably have nothing in there, which is my case. But the local projects directory, that is another place where, again, where you can create Common Lisp projects. And we're going to see when we're using the software now, the various different places that a person could make use of. All right, so for example, when we go ahead and make a new project, let's go ahead and make a new project. In fact, let's go ahead and make a project, an application, what is not a Common Lisp application, and let's call it our number one. Go ahead and create that project. You see, I get a list of local project directories that are available on ASDF. And by the way, the entire project facility of CLOG actually uses the ASD facility and QuickLisp. So because of that, essentially, files which you have access to and use in other projects and using Emacs and other software that you have access to there, you also have access to here. In fact, there's no reason why a person couldn't write his entire application using Emacs, but again, manage the project, for example, here in the builder. So let's go. We're going to say we'd like to put this into the Common Lisp directory. We'll select that directory, and we'll go ahead, and there we go. We've created our first project. And again, this is just a very simple project. In fact, you're going to see there's really not much to it. It's just a hello world project. In fact, this project exists, excuse me, as a filler, of course, for us to continue. And we would start applying all that we know about Common Lisp to create this awesome project to do whatever we might want it to do. It doesn't have to be programmed here. Of course, it can be programmed here. This is one of the great things about the IDE, but you can do this in Emacs as well. In fact, because of the fact I started this in Emacs, as you'll see here, these little markers here, some of the other stuff I was doing, we'll get to that soon, but I went ahead and the ASDF system loaded our number one and everything else, just like we would be doing this at Emacs prompts. And in fact, I could go ahead, we could actually edit the files that we use here, just like we could in any other of our files, in this case, our number one, and number one .lisp. And in fact, I just want to show you something interesting, right? Let's go ahead, basically, let's go back. Again, the ability package function we'll see later on with CLOG, which actually will run, which is actually part of the ASD file, which you can actually take a look at here. This is what your file looks like, the one that was generated with the project. You'll notice the components depends on, there's of course no dependency in this particular project, but the entry point, our number one, start app, right? And that's actually over here, start app. Now it happens to be that when it's a CLOG application, it knows what to do and it'll go ahead and run it and you'll be able to use it and everything else. But in truth, that entry point may not necessarily have much use on a project which is just Common Lisp, and that's fine because most people, that's not how they run their projects. However, let's actually go ahead, but since we already loaded the project, we can go back to our Slime interface just like we would with anything else, and we can go ahead and you'll actually see here, let's do in package, right? And let's go, what's it called, our number one, right? There we go. How about that? We're in our files. In fact, you can go ahead, like I said, here, there, everywhere. You can basically go ahead and access your same Lisp image in both places. Not a problem at all. Now, in this particular case, now that we're here, we can go ahead and we can do start, right? Start app. There you go. Boom. Hello world. No problem at all. In fact, we can go in here and we can say hi, right? And we can save that, right? Okay, we can do our control option X. There we go. We compiled it, evaluated it, right, into our list image. And then we can go ahead and we can do our start app again, and boom, hello world, hi. There you go, very simple. We can go back, of course, into our CLOG interface, right? In this case, we definitely want to reload the file, right? And here's our hello world, hi. And again, we could have made the changes over here. Hello world, hi. Wow. And we can go ahead and we can save it. We can go ahead, let's do val form. Okay, very good. And then we can go back here and actually, hi, wow, great. You see, it's all in the same image, all the same files. Everything goes back and forth, no problem at all. Okay, so again, going back to our little tool here, you'll notice basically have what's called a runtime system. Again, in normal in projects which are not not CLOG projects, they're all going to say missing /tools, unless for some reason that particular project happens to have a /tools. But that's what's used for design time. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. But in the meantime, basically, it's just this nice way that you can be able to use and basically edit your ASD files and change them, everything else. And then you could reload your file whenever you need to, and boom, that's where it is. And that's kind of how that works. But again, so that's one option. Now, let's take a look at, just to show you an example. Here's a live LSP, a file that I was looking at not that long ago. And here's some cool example. Go to source files, go here, and all the various different files you can see. They're in the project. We can open them up, play with them, edit them, etc., and so forth. Okay, anyways, let's go ahead and let's unload this project. We don't need it right now. And let's look at doing a few other little cute things with CLOG Builder. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do now is let's go ahead and let's just do a very simple CLOG project, right? So fill template, and again, we're going to say system name, let's see here, my second, right? And done, and let's put it in common Lisp, and load project, let's say okay. Right, and okay, so away we go. So now that we have a full CLOG project, let's look at some of the things that are more specific to using, of course, the CLOG Builder with CLOG. So first of all, CLOG projects have two separate sections. And actually, let's go ahead and look at the ASD file inside. There's actually two systems in here. One system is my second, right? That's the one we created. And again, all the normal information that you'd have in any ASD file. In addition to that, we have a second system, right, which is basically called my second /tools. So everything in the /tools directory while you're developing, right, essentially that's live. And when you're just running an application, then only this section is actually live. Okay, and I'll show you a little bit more. We'll go back and forth and make that clearer. Now, there's one thing that you may not have seen in other ASD files, and that's dev system depends on CLOG. And the reason is the CLOG itself, the project, includes the ability to do what's called a CLOG file as one of the components of your tools directory. Well, not the directory. It's actually all mixed in the same directory, unless, of course, you put here different directories. But meaning to say that the files here, the CLOG file, are a special type of file. And that's the main.clog, for example, main.clog, next.clog. Those are files that are CLOG files. Now, CLOG files are simply, as if you know about the way CLOG works, they're actually just straight HTML with some additional valid HTML tags and things added to it to be able to indicate things that are necessary for this. And actually, they actually contain actual Lisp code and things like that. So it's not HTML you actually want to make available on a web server, but it's the HTML that essentially defines each one of the panels and where things are in the panels and the text, and like I said, even the events that are found on the various things you've done. So CLOG files actually are very editable even as text. In fact, I'll show you something here. Let's just open a file, right? Next.clog. Well, okay, it doesn't look so good like this because it's not formatted nicely. But basically, this data tag, which is actually a real tag in HTML, but basically everything from here on are all basically tags that you'll be familiar with. And you can actually take straight HTML, because the data's not there, that's fine, it'll still work, and actually load it directly in as a panel in CLOG. But that's a different issue. The point of the matter is that the, excuse me, is that basically we go ahead, let's go back and pull up ASD again. So what happens is that here you have CLOG files, and CLOG files indicate files basically that contain stuff for the CLOG builder. And then in the actual project, of course, you need to have the rendered files from CLOG to actual Lisp files, and that's just regular file components, in other words, in the def system called MySecond. But you don't really need to deal with all this. You can just deal with the interface, which is nice. I find it very, very convenient. And essentially, I go ahead, I load my project. The entry point is which function is the one that, when I hit run, will be actually executed, right? So in this case, if we take a look at the MySecond.lisp, that's for our app, a start app. And I can go in here and I can change what is the startup function of the project and everything if I want. If you actually deploy the project, the entry point says what is the entry point when the project is deployed. And again, that'll be a different discussion, a different CLOG Extra, where we discuss basically, again, how to deploy your projects in various different ways, as web service, as web services, as applications from Windows and Linux, and for that matter, they can even be, of course, deployed for iPhone and Android. But all those types of different deployments we'll talk about different times. But for right now, we're dealing with, like I said, just the CLOG project. Now, the CLOG project basically allows us to add additional files. So if I want to add another panel, I can just do add CLOG, and I give the new panel, let's call it, right? New panel, right? And there you go. So that will create a new panel. And if you'll notice, by the way, it actually creates two files. It creates the new panel, and it creates the file new panel Lisp. Now, these files are never edited. So, for example, main.lisp, right? This file is not something that you would actually be editing it, right? So, for example, when you go ahead and you render a file, then that will make a change to the file that we just saw, right? And that was main.lisp, right? So this basically is, again, only modify the original CLOG file, and you would make some changes there, okay? So basically, the panel, right, that's the design time type of thing. This doesn't go into a runtime system. This basically goes into your design time system. So that's where the main CLOG, all these panels. And this is our brand new panel that we created. We throw a button on the panel, and we can go ahead again. Let's save and render, right? And then if you go back here to the panel again, there you go. All our code for the panel we just created, all created for us, right? And then I can add Lisp files directly to design time. For example, I may have some extended functionality that's connected to things only used during design time, but for the most part, you're just using the add CLOG. And then again, add Lisp allows me to add additional files to my project. And again, I can, just lets me add them as needed. Remove, of course, is to remove a particular file. So, for example, if I want to remove this panel, I can go ahead and do that. And then I can go here and I can remove that panel. But of course, this removes it from the ASD file. And if you look at the ASD file, right, there you go, sorry, you'll see that basically MySecond, main, next, and of course our files are now missing. So if I wanted to actually do that, I could go view directory, and that basically gives me the directory. And then I can say, oh, well, I tell you what, that new stuff I created, right, that new panel, what was that? It was called new panel, right? Yeah, so let's go ahead and let's delete that, okay, and let's go ahead and, let's go ahead and delete the CLOG file. We don't need that, okay. And yeah, let's get rid of the backup file, and the same thing over here. And at least, of course, we have a nice clean directory, right? And that's it. Happens to be, by the way, I can open up files from here as well. And there you go. I'm actually able to edit, and I can actually open a CLOG file just as similarly directly from there as well, and be able to edit it on the panel. Okay, so let's go ahead and close this. So in addition to this, though, and really the last part of I'll mention a couple other things, but the last part of this interface between the runtime system and design system are the dependencies. So what happens is you have runtime dependencies. Of course, CLOG is automatically a dependency. CLOG tools right, is automatically a dependency. And by the way, any project that depends on another project from CLOG is always going to have the CLOG and the CLOG tools. Just here again, we have two systems, mysecond/CLOG. So basically, of course, the CLOG/tools depends upon mysecond, this particular runtime system, and of course also on CLOG tools, which of course is where the builder is and everything else. So, but the point is, if I wanted to say, for example, let's say I wanted, and this is actually a bit of important, let's say I want to add a specific plugin. So that's basically going to go ahead and that's going to add my tools and everything necessary to make it work. So let's do CLOG Plotly, right? And there we go. And that will add it, and that's part of it. And I will show you something else really neat. Now that we've added Plotly to our project, I can actually go back into here, and it adds it as a control in the panels that you can now start editing stuff. And now I can go ahead and I can actually use CLOG Plotly. Oops, sorry about that. But I actually now have, I think I made a mistake and even added two of them. Delete. Okay, there we go. So I actually now have, I have my let's actually do something. Slow 1 second. Let's go ahead and make this much larger. I'll tell you what. Let's go ahead so we can work a little easier here. Okay, main container. Okay, here we go. And let's go and take CLOG Plotly. Let's make it a shift and let go, and makes it part of. Now it's a child of this container. Okay, perfect. Okay, so and we go ahead and run that, and yeah, so okay, good, fine. Actually, I'm not hooked up to the internet while I'm doing this recording. So basically, but normally speaking, that would actually go ahead and do a load in Plotly files. Actually, if I was doing this as a standalone application, I probably would, of course, add the necessary files to my www directory. Okay, anyways, let's say that that's the case. So anyways, the point of the matter is, let's go ahead, close this. Okay, close. Save panel, yes. Okay. All right. So, anyways, like I said, once I add CLOG Plotly, then basically everything is installed. However, I just realized that, when I add a plugin here, that's good. Then really we should also add CLOG Plotly here. Pretty sure that needs to be done. So actually, I found a little bit of a bug. We'll make sure that in the future we can modify. Oh, actually, it was already there and I missed it. Not good. Let's actually go in there. So actually did get added, it just didn't show up there. Let's just make sure it's not in there multiple times. Yeah, okay, depends on CLOG Plotly once. Okay, let's go ahead and save that. Let's reload our project. There we go. Okay, we're good. So yeah, so actually adding CLOG Plotly actually did add the runtime, and I'll find out why it didn't show up in our runtime dependencies later. But basically, runtime dependencies, like I said, those are what's necessary when you're running your application. And since you're going to use CLOG Plotly, you want to make sure it's in the runtime dependencies. And it, again, does automatically get added when you use plugin. And design dependencies, like I said, they all go in here. Okay. So a couple more things. Unload a project, takes it out of the memory, gets it out of the ASDF loaded systems, reloads it. And render is actually an interesting feature. If I push that, what it does is it loads each one of the CLOG files and renders them to text to ensure that you have the properly rendered files for all the list files that correspond with the CLOG files. New, of course, is new project. We already did. And run, of course, we know is run. And there we go. Like I said, I'm not hooked to the internet, so it's not going to work properly the way I have things configured. Let's see if I can quickly get on. Okay. Yeah, okay, so we can go ahead and do run. There we go. Okay, so there you go. You get to see it working. Okay. All right. All been amazing. And like I said, hope this gives a little more understanding of how the projects work in general in CLOG.